Why do bad things happen to good people?
Can I believe in Jesus and also believe in science?
Aren't all religions the same anyway?
Why would a good God let bad things happen?
Doesn't science prove the Bible's
What
not
happens when you die?
How old is the universe?
Why do my parents fight so
Why do
much?
good things happen to bad people?
Why is it so hard to make friends?
Say I have to love
Is karma a real thing?
Does the Bible talk about why
Doesn't science prove the Bible's not
Why
real?
do my parents
Doesn't science
Today, I want to share with you a relic from the distant past. Something that lived in my truck from the time I first got my driver's license until smartphones made it obsolete. This is a road atlas. Perhaps you've seen one in a museum or something. But it is a giant book full of maps and is the only thing that stood between me and being lost and never heard from again as I got a driver's license and started trying to navigate this gigantic city all by myself. And I will never forget the day I got lost way over here in Chandler. I grew up in the North Phoenix area and was down here for something, and on my way back home, somehow got turned all around and got going on the 202 East. I was on it for an embarrassing amount of time before I realized there was a problem. And just about the time I was starting to think about maybe turning around or figuring out what was going on, the signs that said 202 East started to change and say 202 North, which seemed weird because freeways aren't supposed to change direction arbitrarily. Before I could panic, however, 202 North started saying 202 West. So now I was going in the complete opposite direction I had started going, but was sort of going in the direction I wanted to go to get back home. It was extremely confusing. So I pulled over and consulted my trusty road atlas, because that's why it was in the truck in the first place, and figured out what I had done. The Loop 202, it turns out, is named such because it makes a loop. Brilliant, I know. So while I was down here in Chandler and should have just gone west a few miles to hook up with the Loop 101 and make my way back home, I had gone east until I reached the end of the 202 where it turns north. I drove past this future site of our East Valley campus, what's up guys, and then ultimately looped back around to the west where I wanted to go. So I put the atlas away, I got back on the road, continued going west, and had only gone out of my way about 1,004 miles. Eventually, I landed at the 101 like I wanted, and was able to get back home a half tank of gas later. Here's why I tell you all that. It's not to scare you about the perils of trying to drive once you get a license. You'll be fine, you have Siri, it's gonna work out. I tell you that because when we talk about going the absolute wrong direction and somehow still ending up where you wanted to go, that's sort of a miracle in the world of driving. Like, that doesn't usually happen. The 202 just happened to be probably the most forgiving highway I could have gotten lost on, since it was ultimately gonna point me back where I wanted to be. But this idea of going a totally different direction and still ending up in the same place as somebody going the opposite direction is actually very common when it comes to the world of faith or religion. You might have heard a question posed somewhat like this: don't all religions ultimately lead to God? It's a fair question. I mean, all of them have something to do with a god or gods and some path to make it to heaven or paradise or whatever their view of the afterlife is. Could it be that we all just sort of take these different paths and ultimately they're all going to the same place? It sounds so nice, doesn't it? Like, we want the answer to be yes, because that sounds inclusive and helpful and kind, and why wouldn't it be that way? Well, today I want to dig into this question, to really look at what the Bible says and logically speaking, what answer we could form to this question. But before we answer the question, do all religions lead to God, we actually need to step back, because that's a secondary question under a much bigger heading, which is the question of what is truth? Like what does truth mean? Which may sound kind of absurd because it's a simple word that we learned when we were young children, but the actual definition of what is truth has kind of been mixed up and changed a little bit over the last couple decades. Because while we used to define truth as what is true, what is correct, what has evidence to support it, what is just true because it's true, what can't really be argued against because anything that contradicts that truth is by definition untrue, Now, when we hear the word truth, we probably think something more along the lines of what does a person feel is true for them? Like, what is their truth? There's this idea that you've probably heard, maybe you've never even thought about it or realized it, but that you can have your truth, whatever you choose to believe, like this is true for me, I can have my truth. Those two things can be wildly different or even completely contradictory, and yet they can be true for each of us. Perhaps you've heard that. Maybe that sounds crazy to you, but that is the idea that goes around about what truth is. And the reason this creates a problem when we're trying to talk about religion, and if all religions lead to God, is that all religions make claims about what is true. They say this is the truth about God, about heaven, about how to get there. And all of those truth claims don't line up with each other. In fact, Jesus, one of the most famous things he ever said is in John 14, and it's the clearest thing he ever said about truth. And he said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. And I don't want to turn this into like a grammar lesson, but Jesus didn't use the word the on accident. He was saying he is the truth, the one and only way to get to God. And that's a problem because if Jesus is the only way to get to God, then there's no logical way that all these other religions that say here's different ways to get to God, they can't all be going in the same direction. Jesus was saying that he is the truth, and that doesn't change just because someone personally wants to claim a truth that is different than that. You see, the thing about truth in general is that truth remains true whether we agree with it or not. And so let me give you an example from a couple religions to try to put this into perspective. Christianity is built on the belief that Jesus died on a cross and rose from the dead. Islam, on the other hand, claims that Jesus was actually rescued by God before his crucifixion and that somebody else was crucified in his place. Those cannot both be true. Historically speaking, either Jesus died on a cross or he didn't. They can't both be true. Or to look at another example, Mormonism says that God, or who we view as God, was actually once a man who worked his way up to become a god, and he's actually one of many gods in this celestial universe. Christianity looks at the Bible and says that God has always existed and is the one and only God that we should worship, the one and only God in existence. They can't both be true. God cannot be both one of many gods and also the only God. They contradict. And we could take any two religions and lay their claims about truth out next to each other, and they would all contradict each other in some way, usually in multiple ways. And so ultimately, if all religions are trying to point to God or heaven or the afterlife or however you want to put it, the Loop 202 idea that they're all going to just somehow work their way back around to go to the same place just doesn't work. It is much more like a person going in this direction on one freeway and a person going this direction on another freeway and ending up in two very different destinations. And let me just zero in for a second on the biggest fundamental difference between Christianity and any other religion you can find out there. See, the Bible teaches that way, truth, and life Jesus was talking about is what he did for us to pave our way to heaven. That it is a free gift that we cannot earn in any way, shape, or form. That Jesus, through his death on a cross and resurrection, took care of any hurdles we would have to jump through, any steps we would have to take, any good deeds versus bad deeds. All of that stuff went away because by placing our faith in him and his sacrifice for all the mistakes we have made, we know that heaven issue, that connection to God issue, that destination issue has been settled. Every other religion out there has some form of a list of things you have to do to earn your way into heaven. And guys, I want that to sink in for a second, because we probably don't think about it as much as we should, but there are billions of people on the planet who believe something that is simply untrue. They are sincere, wonderful, hardworking people who mean so well, but sincerely believe something that isn't true. And so ultimately, they are spending their days desperately trying to earn their way to a connection with God, to earn their way into heaven or paradise or whatever you want to call it. They're trying to earn it. And even there is a contradiction. It can't both be a free gift from Jesus and also a set of rules you have to follow and do your best to make it there. It doesn't work. So, do all religions lead to God? No. No, they don't. They can't. And we need to feel the weight of that. Again, this is not a we're right, they're wrong sort of message. That's not what this is about. This is about billions of people, sincere, wonderful, hardworking, loving people who sincerely believe something that is just untrue. They don't realize they are on the wrong road, heading in the wrong direction. And Jesus left it up to us to share that He is the way, the truth, and the life with everyone we come in contact with. So who do you know? Who is in your life right now that has no idea they're on the wrong road? And what are you going to do about it?